So do you find your sessions for some people almost as a preventative measure?
Most definitely. I mean, people come in to see me. The first part of their journey with me is to help rid their body of these symptoms of dis-ease in their life. They then reach that point where those symptoms are gone. And then they realize the second reason they've come to see me is to get to a deeper place of peace, deeper place of balance, so that they can eliminate possible suffering in the future that would happen if they went into different patterns or had deeper patterns they weren't aware of that maybe weren't manifesting in disease now, but had the potential to manifest in it later. So we deal with the subconscious and cellular memory systems, and they can then rid themselves of potential patterns in the future. Some things in our path cannot be avoided because there's specific learning incidences, but my point is, let's rid ourselves of the attractor fields that we can to, minimize the possible suffering.
Sounds fairly simple, once again.
It really is.
Now, one of the things that your center promotes, from what I've read, is this work-life balance. Do you find in your interaction with your clients that is predominant, and as a result of seeing you, they're able to achieve that, or is it always a struggle?
I think that question points to one of the biggest reasons for dis-ease, and that is people have identified themselves with what they do instead of who they are. And because of that, these roles that they play, especially at work, are what they're trying to gain a great amount of validation and acceptance from. And because of that, they let themselves go into extreme places of imbalance in trying to achieve something, which quite frankly, most of the work environments are not built to validate and give people the proper credit for what they do. So what I help people with is when they come to see me is I help them balance their work life with their personal life and start to realize that it's really not necessary for them to become somebody else when they go to work. That it's the most important job that we have is to be ourselves. That God created us to be who we are. That's our job. Whatever we do to make a living shouldn't change us from being who we are. And once they start being who they are in their work environment, it's far less of a job and more of just a different experience they're having as themselves. And that experience is tied to financial gain or to career or whatever, but it doesn't define them anymore. And that shift in perception allows them to stay balanced.
One of the things that I've always wondered about people in your profession is what keeps you balanced and what keeps you grounded?
I'm a person who never asks another individual to do what I don't do. I live my life not just by my word, but by my example. I teach 2 yoga classes, unwind classes, I call them spontaneous, intuitive stretching, relaxation classes. I do resistance training, and I run. I eat 75% raw, and of that raw food, probably 70% of it is juice. So I really, I live my truth. And so for me, balance is a part of what I do to maintain my intuitive gift. So for me, balance really isn't a choice. It is just what is. And so whether it meant I needed to change something in my work schedule in my life, whatever needs to be done to maintain balance for me, it is just done, because without that balance, nothing else works.
I've read a number of articles that have said that perhaps Americans are the most over-medicated group in the history, I guess, the pharmaceutical world. What role does medication play?
It's a great question. And I'm not in a space where I don't think there's a place for everything. I think medicine has its place. I think drugs have their place. I think holistic work has their place. And the reason that I say this is because everybody's in a different space of spiritual development and consciousness. And the place of spiritual development and consciousness is what makes somebody open or ready to do whatever they're ready to do to try and get better. And so many times, people who have come to see me have needed to be on medication for 2 or 3 years before they came to a space where they were ready to try healing in a different way, or they were ready to accept it. But I do feel the reason that Americans, and I do agree with that, are overly medicated is because we continue to believe in a space of life that causes us to need it. We continue to believe that we have to be doing all the time. We continue to believe we have to be consuming all the time. We continue to believe we have to be working. I think our attitude in this country is at times just a little immature, and we're growing up and we're getting it, but like when you're younger, in the teenage years, you want it now. And I think that that want it now attitude that shows up in the medication used in our country, that shows up in some of the financial crises we're experiencing, it's all symptomatic of our growth process. And I think if we really stand back and look at ourselves as a nation honestly, and we let our ego drop enough to realize we're a young, developing, talented country, but we are going to make these mistakes, and we have to accept them as a learning process and part of who we are. And I think part of that is that we rely on medications instead of really looking at ourselves and understanding what's wrong. I don't really see anything wrong with even using medication. I just think if you're going to take a medication for anything, at least take the time to reflect on what is really the reason. If you still need a medication, or you're still in a space spiritually where you depend on a medication, that's fine. But at least be giving it thought and intention as to why is it happening. If you do that, I guarantee you, at some point, you will either come to peace in your life with what it is, and it'll resolve, which will need less medication, if any, okay? Or you'll come to a space of consciousness that makes you realize that what you're really sick over is an illusion or is unimportant, and in that way it'll dissolve from your life. Just by giving it a thought and intention in terms of why is it happening.
So you see it more as a personal decision / responsibility in the individual. But do you find that in some cases, such as individuals who are bipolar, they may require a certain level of medication even to get them on a track?
I think that most definitely there are some situations that are going to require maybe even a certain amount of medication, and it's not a buy-in. I think miraculous healing is possible for any medical condition or health condition whatsoever. But I think realistically speaking, especially with some people who have disorders or conditions that are in specific sociological contexts where they may not have access or resources to deal with it in a different way, I think that it's a wonderful option, and it allows many people to live productive lives that without means to deal with things in another way would be totally lost. So I think that it plays a very important role, and I think there are certain conditions that it is necessary and appropriate. I just think those percentage of conditions are far less than what we are currently doing.